Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm recording on a new camera. This is my camcorder. Normally I film on my Canon G7X Mark, whatever it is, but I forgot to charge the battery, so I'm trying this one out. This is actually quite a new one. It can do 4K, but we're not recording in 4K because I don't want everyone to see my pores. Not pause, but like pause. And the video processing time in HD is an abomination in itself, so I can only imagine how I will literally probably have to wait centuries for a 4K video to upload onto YouTube. Anyway, I'm rambling. This is my September wrap-up. I didn't really read that much in September. I thought I was going to read more, but I only finished one full book during the entire month, and then I finished like the tail end of the Silmarillion and then started reading a couple of newer books as well. So the first book that I actually finished, I don't have it with me because I've lost it. I don't know where it's gone. It's quite a small, thin book, and yeah, it's completely vanished. Let me find out what it was called because I've also forgotten what it was called. Grown Ups by Marie Aubert, and it was translated from Norwegian by Rosie Hedger. The premise of the story is that a family is gathering at their cabin. I think it's during the summer for the 60th birthday of the mother. There's two sisters. One is a 40-year-old architect, and the other is, I don't know what her profession was, but she's married and she is trying to get pregnant and have a baby, and she also has a husband who has a young daughter from a previous relationship. So that sort of sets the tone of the book. It's called Grown Ups, but everyone in it is really quite petty. They're all trying to like compete with each other, especially like the two sisters. There's a lot of rivalry between them, but it's very like sort of subdued. It's almost like we won't talk about this rivalry, but it's there. We will just sort of like surreptitiously try to outdo each other and things like that. I found it quite a lackluster read, if I'm perfectly honest. Like, I found most of the characters really quite annoying. The idea behind it being called Grown Ups is to sort of look at how essentially petty grown ups can actually be, and that when do you truly become a grown up? It's probably when you have emotional intelligence to sort of, I don't know, just be nice to each other, not be crap humans. It wasn't great. I don't recommend it. On to the next book. What did I read next? Oh yes, I finished the Silmarillion. I have the hard copy here, but I did listen to it mainly on audiobook because of names. There are so many names in this that are just literally impossible to read from the page and actually get them correct. Idril Celebrindal. Who knows if I'm saying that right? Obviously, Tolkien was a linguistics genius, so there's so many cool names in this. And if you delve into his sort of complex mythology, all of the names have meanings. There's elves that all have very similar names. There's also men that all have very similar names, like Hurtur and all that. I've already got into ranting about not being able to keep up with the names. I enjoyed reading this. I thought it was a great backdrop to The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and it's going to be interesting to then reread those books with a complete, if I can remember it, context of the history. But yeah, if you enjoy mythology and Middle-earth, then this is essential reading, essentially. I didn't get all of it, and I didn't get probably the most out of it, but this is a book to return to, and I knew that, I can't get my words out. I knew that when I was getting into it. I knew, okay, this is like, you know when you do a draft of something, you know it's not going to be the finished product. So reading this was like draft one. I'm not going to retain most of the information here, but I'm going to sort of flow along with the story. And then on a reread, and then in a reread, then everything will sort of click in and I will remember it. And then towards the end of the month I did start reading Go Into the Dogs, The Story of a Moralist by Eric Kastner, which was translated from German by Cyrus Brooks. I spoke about this in my autumn TBR video, which was the last video I did, which was with my sister. Essentially, this is set during the end, in the last sort of years of the Weimar Republic, which was the interim period between World War One and World War Two, or more specifically 1933, when the Nazis seized power. It charts the extravagance, the sort of burning, fervent spirit of these years through the story of Jakob Fabian, who is a young man who works at an advertising industry selling cigarettes. He's dissatisfied with life, aren't we all? And yeah, like on the back it does say it is a book for our time too, and it does feel eerie how society is at the moment, and like, are we heading for another political sort of tragedy? It's quite eerie. I'm enjoying it so far. I am on chapter 5, and it's quite amusing because it is a satire, so it is looking at basically people sort of just meandering through life, not really paying attention to what is bubbling under the surface around them. Yeah, it's brilliant. The reason why I started reading this is because I've been rewatching, this is going to segue into film and TV, I've been rewatching Babylon Berlin recently, because the 4th season, which I think is the 3rd season, it's a bit confusing, comes out on my birthday. It takes place in this exact time period, and it's so fascinating. Like, the show is brilliant. It's about a detective investigating murders during the Weimar Republic, and the period details are magnificent. But yeah, I became very interested with this sort of time period because it's just literally so rich for storytelling, and the fact that we retrospectively know what is on the horizon, whereas the people populating this book, Babylon Berlin, don't exactly know. Like, they know bad things are happening, but they don't know how bad it's going to get. I love the show so much, and I'm really enjoying this so far. What else have I watched on television? Another German show, actually. I recently watched Barbarians, which takes place way back. It's like essentially the story of the barbarians, so the Germanic tribes, versus the Romans, which is pretty cool. Like, it's strange how some stories haven't ever really been told. I mean, I don't know, there was a TV show called Rome years ago, and I think I watched some of it, but I don't think it covered the barbarian uprising. But anyway, this takes place when the tribes are all separate, but then they come together and go against the almighty empire. It's really good. It's on Netflix, and season 2 does actually come out, I think, end of October. So stay tuned for me reviewing season 2 in my October wrap up. Continue with House of Dragon and The Rings of Power. Both fantasy, both production wise outstanding, but I will say I'm so much more invested in House of the Dragon. I think the way it's paced and the story it's telling is infinitely more interesting currently. Anyway, with The Rings of Power, there are some storylines that I'm invested in and others I could not care less for. An example of that is the Harfoots. I don't understand why we are following hobbits in this story. They are of no interest to me. The Second Age is all about the elves and the rise of men, the corruption of men, and, man, the fall of Numenor. That's the interest in the rich storytelling. The Harfoots, hobbits, what's the point? And I must admit, on one of the episodes I was like, oh, every time it switched back to them. But then it did turn it around, I think it was in episode 7, when we basically just followed the storyline of Arondir and Bronwyn, and then Numenor coming along to save the day, essentially, in their battle with the orcs. I thought that was exquisitely shot, and it was much more riveting. So hopefully in season 2, because I think I need to catch up on one more episode, and hopefully in season 2 they will just, I don't know, like, abandon the hobbits, please. The dwarves love Disa. She is absolutely exquisite. Like, her voice in that scene where she's singing to the rocks, felt like a religious experience. And I love her relationship with Durin, whatever number he is, and then the sort of banter between Elrond and Durin. Like, elves and dwarves and their friendships are beautiful. I love that so much as well. So they are the two storylines I'm invested in. Arondir and essentially the dark decay of Mordor spreading, and the elves and the dwarves storyline, and then obviously that will lead into Celebrimbor crafting the rings, and then Sauron coming along as Anatar. Or is he already there? Is he Halbrand, or is that too obvious? House of Dragon, love it, exquisite. Yeah, it's dark fantasy, and I think the way they've written this season is really great, and I don't want to talk about it because it's really good. And I don't want to spoil anything because I don't know how to talk about it without spoilering. But yeah, anyway, those are the TV shows I've been watching. Let's get on to the movies. I'm not going to dwell very long on the movies because I know that I always just ramble on. And then, like, quite a lot of the time you can see when you look at analytics, like, there's a drop-off in viewers. Perhaps the obvious one to talk about is the latest Cronenberg movie. I know I always talk about Cronenberg on this channel for some reason, but I'm just in a bit of a moment with that director. So it was Crimes of the Future. I went to see that at the cinema, thankfully, that they had a showing kind of near me, and it turned into something I didn't expect it to turn into. When you look at the movie, there's obvious, and I like what Cronenberg does here, is he threads things from his previous films into this one. So if you've seen Dead Ringers, if you've seen Existenz and other things like that, there's threads from those movies in this movie, and it's almost like he's recharting ground and then making something new with it, which I think is really interesting. Essentially, it follows two performance artists who perform surgery as art, and it also weaves in another story about people who can digest plastic, and the fact that a lot of people see this as unnatural, disgusting, weird, and so then everyone's like spooked by this. Oh, it's so disgusting, oh, it's so unnatural, how can humans do this? But I think it's quite fascinating, this whole idea of global warming, and basically we've ravaged the earth, and then these people start eating plastic so that they can help unfuck the earth. I didn't expect that to happen in the film at all. I just literally thought it was about weird body artists, and there's a scene with a man with ears all over him. That is in the trailer, so it's not a spoiler. But yeah, so it has these two very strange aspects to it. It's quite beautifully shot, and it's quite grotesque as well. Like, some of the machines that look very organic is very Existenz, and they're gross, it's disgusting. And then there's also another thread in the film, I'm not going to say what it is about, but it just became quite random, and then it wasn't solved at the end, which I must admit I do like it when films just don't explain certain things and it's just like, oh, that's happening, make of it what you will. But yeah, I really enjoyed the movie, and yeah, if you've seen Crimes of the Future, let me know what you thought of it in the comments section. I think it's quite an interesting film, and I feel like on a rewatch I would be able to deconstruct it even more. Oh yeah, really bad Swedish movie. I'm not even going to grace it with any time of day. Fabian Going to the Dogs. That's also another reason why I picked up this book, is because I watched the film adaptation and that was pretty decent. 3,000 Years of Longing. This is George Miller? Yeah, George Miller. This tells the tale of a djinn and a woman who is a she's not necessarily a storyteller, but she studies stories, which fascinating. And yeah, so she acquires a beautiful glass bottle from her travels, and it just so happens that a djinn pops out. And then they talk about wishes and sort of his history as well, which is the most fascinating part of the movie, is where it goes back into these very beautiful, vivid, dreamlike places of the past. Is it guilty of Orientalism and exotification of the East? yes, and it is also created and directed by a white male. So there is implications of potentially otherness and things like that in it. It's also based on a short story by someone. I will insert that here because I've forgotten who it is. And again, so then it's like Arabian Nights or / 1001 Nights, which essentially were oral tales told by people in the Middle East, but then were collected by a French man. And that's the stories you read now. I had to study this at university and I thought it was fascinating how these tales are assumed to be from the East, but they're actually retold by a Western perspective. And so then if you look into this film as, again, a Western perspective on Eastern mythology and stories, it creates a whole new layer of it. I do still actually need to read Edward Said's Orientalism because I think that would also feed into how you can analyse this movie. Towards the end, it did get a bit lacklustre because there was a lot of cuts to black because clearly they wanted time to pass, but I don't know, it just felt a bit lazy in direction personally. But yeah, book nerd in me saw a front cover of an Angela Carter book. It was fairy tales, which I thought, oh, okay, that's great mise-en-scene because she's a storyteller. She studies stories, and so then the fact that she's got an Angela Carter, which is a retelling of fairy tales, is like, yeah, that's great. And then also at one point, Tilda Swinton's character was reading Khalil Gibran's The Prophet, which is a beautiful book. So I thought that was quite cool. But yeah, I think that the film definitely did belong to Idris Elba and his magnificent multifaceted portrayal of the Jinn. I would recommend watching it, but I would also recommend deconstructing it as well as a Western narrative on Eastern mythology. What's next? Oh yes, I watched 2 German films. Both actually had Franz Rogowski, who's a phenomenal actor, and that is Great Freedom and Lucifer. Or Lucifer, I'm not too sure how to pronounce it. Great Freedom is set during it charts quite a long period of time. It begins at the end of World War II and then follows a character, I think, long into maybe the 70s or the 80s. And essentially it is about a gay man who, this is quite harrowing actually, who was obviously in one of the concentration camps because Hitler was a piece of shit. And then this guy, basically, the war ends, Germany is liberated by the West, America, and all those powers, and he goes straight from the concentration camp to prison because being gay is still outlawed. What the fuck? You just can't make this stuff up, can you? Yeah, so basically he then gets put into prison alongside criminals. There's a murderer, there's rapists and things like that, and he's literally in there because he's gay. And it charts him forming an unlikely friendship with, I think the guy's a murderer. And then it follows them over the years, and they form a very, I don't know, like a very strong bond with each other. There's a bit of like homoerotic subtext to the relationship and things like that. It's on Mubi, and I would say it's worthwhile. I think it's important to watch movies that deal with atrocities, like the fact that you can survive one of the most harrowing places and then just be chucked straight into prison. Unbelievable. And yeah, Franz Rogowski's phenomenal in this. Like, he really does sort of carry this weight in his performance. On to the next film is Lucifer. What the Devil. I think this is an Austrian film technically, and I think it's filmed in the Austrian mountains or something. But yeah, this is by, who is it by? Peter Brunner. Okay, so it charts the story of a mother and her son who live in a very remote mountain landscape. The character that Franz Rogowski plays has sort of a mental disability. Essentially, he has a very like naive outlook, and he basically has the mental faculties of a young child. And so then it shows their everyday sort of life in the mountains. He has like a pet falcon or eagle or something, And then like some people visit them to like supply them with food and things like that. There's a lot of religious stuff in this, like the mother imparts this very cultish religious practice onto this young man, and so that soon builds up to become an obsession, and it has consequences later. But essentially, yeah, it's all about their life in the mountains. Some of the shots in this are absolutely exquisite. Like, the landscape looks so beautiful. And that was part of the appeal of the film, personally. I thought, wow, like, look at this beautiful, almost sublime nature. And then, like, basically, this family are then sort of hounded by a local businessman or a local corporation to leave the mountains because they want to turn it into a ski resort. So there is resistance of the mother and her son, and like these people start logging, like chopping down trees. They fly drones around to try and intimidate them. Throughout the film, there's the idea that potentially this is the work of the devil, like the devil is trying to bring them down from the mountain. And there is a repeated refrain throughout it by Franz Rogowski's character. I've forgotten what the person's name is, but it's like, "Wo ist der Teufel?" Do excuse my German pronunciation. Where is the devil? So he like mutters this to himself over and over again. "Wo ist der Teufel? Wo ist der Teufel?" And yeah, weird stuff happens. It's like a very subtle horror movie. It's not really horror. It's just unsettling. There's a lot of like, yeah, unsettling stuff, but not really. I don't know how to explain it, but it's essentially a slow burn of intensity, and then it almost like doesn't amount to anything. But then something tragic happens, and that is connected to this religious cultish thing that has been practiced. And it's quite sad. But yeah, like, I would recommend this to my fellow art house cinema lovers. And if you do like German cinema, and particularly Franz Rogowski as an actor, then yeah, definitely check it out. But for most people, this is going to be boring and potentially not worth the investment of time. But each to their own, I guess. What's next? What other films have we watched? Oh yeah, See How They Run, which is like essentially a crime caper sort of thing set during the 1950s, and it's got Saoirse Ronan and Sam Rockwell as like detectives investigating a murder in a theatre, and it's during the run of the famous Mousetrap by Agatha Christie. And yeah, I thought it was a bit of fun. I would probably say, yeah, it's like a one-time watch if you're just looking for something to do on a evening. I think the best performances in the movie have to be Saoirse Ronan as the young sort of female police officer, and then David Oyelowo, who played a very over-the-top and camp playwright. I thought he was genius in the role. Like, just he ate that role up. You can just tell he was having the best fun. But yeah, I thought it was a fairly decent film. It was not anything groundbreaking. There was like some tongue-in-cheek meta references to the genre. So it was like very almost the narrator. I think it was Adrian Brody who was narrating it as the person that gets killed. But there's like very tongue-in-cheek and sort of almost like winking to the audience references to the genre of murder mystery, which were quite funny, but also a bit like a bit pretentious. But yeah, I thought it was enjoyable. I think that's all the movies I'm going to talk about. I may have watched a couple of others, but they're of no consequence really, so we will stop there. Thank you for watching, and I do apologise if this video looks gross because the lighting's very weird, and I don't know, I've never used this camera to film these kind of videos before, so I don't know how to set it up, so I do apologise if it's a bit gross looking. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you read in September, and I will see you again soon. Like, subscribe, whatever. Bye bye. So